I'm a senior advisor with Marilyn Perg and Marilyn Perg Foundation, and really appreciate you taking time out of your night on a Monday while you're probably cooking dinner, cleaning up from dinner, dealing with kids. We know how chaotic it can get, so we appreciate you being here. I wanted to introduce a little bit about our campaign and what you're going to hear about tonight before turning it over to our speakers. So the Upgrade Maryland Coalition is a new group of consumer, public health, housing, environmental, faith, and community groups working to upgrade Maryland's homes and businesses with the most efficient electric equipment and healthy building standards to help keep bills low, safeguard our health, and meet our state's climate goals. The majority of our coalition work is focusing on ensuring that utility regulators at the Maryland Public Service Commission use their authority to require Maryland utilities to provide safe, reliable, and affordable energy to customers. In particular, this means that we're working to protect residents from unnecessary rate hikes to pay for spending on methane gas infrastructure. We're working to enforce a new state law to improve the state's energy efficiency program, Empower Maryland. And we're making sure excessive utility profits and spending on gas doesn't crowd out other public priorities around efficiency and clean energy. We're also working with the state legislature to adjust state policy where necessary, and you're going to hear a little about that tonight too. So tonight you're going to hear from some of the state's leading experts on these issues. We'll start with a discussion of the public health and financial impacts of our current system of heating our homes with gas and other fossil fuels. And then we'll shift to some of the solutions, reforming the STRIDE law, utility strategic planning, and implementing the new Empower law that passed this year. At the end, we're hoping to have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please hold them till then or drop them in the chat and we'll pull them up once we're done with our presentations. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to our first speaker, which is Abby Koch from the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. Thanks for being here, Abby.
Thank you so much, Emily. Our president and CEO, Ruth Ann Norton, is on the line. Ruth Ann, did you want to speak?
We'll play color commentary, just like I'm about to do for the Ravens game later tonight. So why don't you go and then I'll fill in the blanks. How's that?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abby Koch, and I'm honored to be the Maryland Community Engagement Organizer for Climate and Energy at Green and Healthy Homes. And I'm here to say a few words about the negative health impacts of burning fossil fuels in our homes and the benefits we can realize by switching to clean energy sources. First off, I want to frame the problem. An estimated 34 million families are living in unhealthy homes in the U.S., concentrated in overburdened and underserved communities, particularly communities of color. So this is an enormous environmental justice and racial justice issue that we're talking about here. And one of the outcomes of this is an enormous epidemic of asthma, which causes over $81 billion of costs in our country each year, sending people, especially children, to the hospital and the ER, and sometimes even costing their lives. 40%, nearly half of all asthma attacks are caused by triggers inside our homes, and fossil fuel-powered appliances are a major culprit in what's harming our respiratory health. Now, how serious is this harm? Just looking at asthma as one marker of the impact, we see a 42% greater likelihood of asthma symptoms in children living in a home with a gas stove as compared to children in homes with an electric stove. 42%. So what is causing that effect? Burning methane, which is the proper name for natural gas, creates nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the most dangerous air pollutants for human health. And during cooking with a gas stove, levels of nitrogen dioxide indoors can reach multiple times the EPA's allowable outdoor limit. And I'll note there is no indoor amount that is considered safe. Another product of methane combustion is benzene, a carcinogen that we're finding has neurological and reproductive health harms. We're really just starting to scratch the surface of the public health dangers of burning these fuels inside our homes. And it doesn't stop there, unfortunately. Fossil fuel use in our homes is a major driver of harmful outdoor air pollution as well. Our furnaces, water heaters, and dryers that burn fossil fuels all vent to the outdoors where the fumes mix with ozone to create health-harming smog. In Maryland, fossil fuel equipment in our buildings is responsible for 3 times the level of nitrogen oxide pollution as all of our state's power plants combined. And eliminating that pollution would have as much impact as taking half of our diesel trucks off the road. So I'll pause there for a moment. I did want to introduce Ms. Taiwo, who's going to speak next, but Ruth Ann.
Abby, just terrific. The couple of things I would add is that 42% increase in exacerbations leads to an additional 24% in hospitalizations and ER visits, most of that borne by Medicaid dollars and children's health insurance dollars for our young children living in distress and disadvantaged communities. But the upside of fixing these health impacts, which also include neurological, reproductive, and cardiac health, and that's where we're just starting to hit that beginning of that research. What we know is when we do a full electrical upgrade, when we change these measures, we are able to dramatically reduce, by improving indoor air quality, we're able to reduce hospitalizations by about 66%. More importantly, we are adding value, home value, and housing stability, and we're lowering the incidence of fires. So when we are doing these measures, they are also delivering true monetary benefits. So the co-benefits around health, around emotional health, around housing stability are really addressing the social drivers and social determinants of health. But Abby, you nailed it. And I know we want to hear from someone who has experienced this. So thank you for doing this today.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth Ann. So making the shift to clean electricity is about a lot of things: our climate, our economy, energy independence, resilience, but most of all, it's about our families and the future of our children. So with that in mind, I'm honored to introduce Ms. Omowunmi Taiwo. She's a professional who serves the community, a mother, and a recent client of Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, who was able to get her home electrified through our programs for Maryland families. And she's graciously offered to share her story tonight. So Ms. Taiwo, I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm excited, super excited to be here today to share my testimony. And I'm so happy, and I say thank you to the Green Homes, because I'm one of the partaker of the great program that they're offering to people now. They were able to help me because I have a child, my son, that is, I would say, chronic asthmatic, and he loves staying in the basement, and I have a gas. The central heat is gas. And, you know, unfortunately, I didn't know that that is really, really contributing a lot of problem to him, to his health. But through the Green Home, I was able to realize what the problem is. They were able to help me. So I told you I'm part of people that benefited for what they did last year, November. They changed our gas, and tremendously, I could see the improve in my son's health. Now, when they did this, I have to go to Google to find out what is the problem, because he has been using medication right from day one, right from baby. And up to 17 and a half years old, he's still on the medication, asthma. I realized that a lot of pollution has been in the basement, has been in the home because of the gas combustion in the house, which I didn't really know that is really the problem, because we're using both gas and electricity. And gas is majority for the central heat. We use gas for our dryer. We use gas for stove. So definitely there is a lot of CO2, carbon dioxide in the house, which I didn't know. But with the help of this program, I'm so super excited. They were able to help me. They changed my gas furnace to electricity. They changed my gas stove to electricity. And they were able to change the water heater too, which is gas, to electricity. And recently, I think they sent some people to come and check the CO2 level in my home, which really, really reduced tremendously. And my child health has been improved. I thought he's going to be around. I know he's on his way running down. He said, I want to come and share my testimony to let people know how healthy I'm becoming. And so I'm so excited about the program, and I will recommend the program to people because it's very good. It will help you, especially environmentally. It's very, very good. It will help, especially with the carbon dioxide conversion, inhaling in the house, and you don't know that's what you are really inhaling in the home.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Omowumi. I think we all wish your family good health. I've been through a similar journey with my son who's asthmatic. Finished converting, but I think about the early years of his life when we were stuck in home during the pandemic with a 3-month-old baby and baking bread every week in my gas stove. And, it's sad that so many of our kids have suffered, but that we have an opportunity to strengthen their health and the health of future generations by permanently changing our homes. I really appreciate your story, as well as Abby for talking more about the health impacts. I'm going to turn it over next to Laurel Peltier, who's one of our state's leading experts on the energy affordability in general, to talk us more about where we are as a state generally for energy affordability, and especially for low and moderate income homes.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be on this wonderful topic of electrification. And can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. So there are many benefits of electrification, and one of them is a kitchen table topic, which is how much do you pay? And I'm going to just talk about gas rates and why they have become unaffordable. I only have 5 minutes, and I could talk about electricity too. And while those rates will be increasing, they're not increasing as much as gas. And cold climate heat pumps are 3 times more efficient than a gas furnace. So there's 3 types of rates on those gobbledygook utility bills that we all get. And one that we don't think of very often is a fixed monthly charge. And those charges have actually become pretty significant. While I am the chair of Energy Advocates and our focus is on low income, this is everybody pays about at least $192 a month to be hooked up to gas. Just to cover, there's BG&E and Washington Gas. BG&E has about 650,000 accounts, Washington Gas about 480. So about half of our state uses methane gas in their house. So I just wanted to put a pin in that. It's pretty regressive. If you're low income, you're paying at least $200. The bucket that's very, very interesting is called 2 things, delivery or distribution. And this is the poles, the wires, the pipes, the emergency outages, trucks. This is actually called the infamous rate base. And this is where STRIDE projects, all of the capital expenses and all the things that are needed to help the utility make their money, they get dumped into this big delivery distribution. So I'm going to show you how those rates have really increased and why. And the third rate is supplier commodity. And a few things to know, gas is measured in therms, and it's priced monthly. So every single residence or home, sorry, there's so much coming across my screen. So I'm getting a little ADD here, but so supply is basically based on the wholesale markets. And an interesting thing to know is that utilities, regulated utilities, don't make profit on supply rates. That's basically a pass-through. You really get to feel what's happening in the wholesale markets. So what has really been hurting budgets is what's going on in the delivery and distribution. And I put the OPC reports link in there because our Office of People's Counsel has done an excellent job taking all this data and putting it into some cool slides just to basically show, ouch. So here's some interesting dates, and you don't need to know all, the little numbers, but this is 2006 to 2026. This is just those delivery charges, the infamous rate base. And I wanted to show a few things. In 2012, Exelon purchased BG&E. They actually started the STRIDE legislation that year. It didn't pass. It passed in 2013. And then you started seeing STRIDE capital projects, shovel-ready capital projects. They were ready. They went to the PSC. Those started in 2014. And then this purple line is where the multi-year rate plans at the PSC, the pilots started. What does all this mean? It means that basically the distribution portion has more than doubled. And that is for basically a delivery system that we are talking about getting rid of
Like, do I want to do?
or eliminating. Washington Gas wasn't as shovel ready, so the Washington Gas residences haven't really seen the same
Ballot?
distribution rates. Supply is very interesting, and the reason I wanted to share this is
I want
as
to do another.
consumers,
Somebody has their microphone on. Can we turn that microphone off for everybody except for the speaker so we can all hear you?
Oh, thank you. So what's kind of interesting about supply is, look, I'm talking to some of the most ardent environmentalists in our state, and we all know that fracking really hit around 2009 is when all that gas hit the markets. And as consumers, we've really enjoyed very low supply rates, around 45 to 60 cents. Except for one area, and you guys all remember after COVID, that Ukraine war really kind of freaked out the markets, and we saw very high supply rates. But on the whole, it's important to know that supply rates have been very, they've actually been very low and very consistent. And where this all comes to play is the big story. So this chart just kind of tells the story that from 2006, hold on, to 2024, you can see the rate pane starting of the D is the distribution. Now that's the regulated utilities distribution. It has just been steadily increasing a lot. This goes from $400 a year that the average house would have spent all the way up to $900. It's actually sitting around $1,000 now. That's the same customer. That means every single year they're paying this much more and this much more. What's interesting is that those cheap supply rates, that cheap frac gas, it kind of masked this because it got so cheap in here that a lot of people were like, you know, my gas bill is kind of the same. This has been happening across the country. So who knows how long supply rates are going to stay low for this? And we do know for a fact that we're just in the beginning of this very big mountains of spending, for the regulated utilities. So gas has become unaffordable. And so what? Well, what happened in 2023, I have the birdie here, was kind of the canary in the coal mine. And that's because it's the first time we really saw terminations. That's where a family's power gets cut off, started to rise. And that's because of that Ukraine gas. I mean, you really got a hit with the delivery rate going up. And then we had rates over $1, $1.10 during the winter. And basically what happened is BG&E turned off 7% of their accounts. And that was about 55% more than what's normal. So we've had a taste of what happens. People can't afford their bills. They get behind. Energy assistance isn't helping, or they're over income for it. And this is really the canary in the coal mine. If terminations get really high, we know that things aren't going to be good. I thought it would be really interesting to share with you what's it like for people out there and how do they see these rates coming. And this is a client of mine that I help every year. Adorable. She's 93. And she mailed me her bill because she said, "What is going on, Laurel?" And so this, as you can see, is from August 2024. And her budget billing, she's a pretty small user too, was $149 a month. And she got a little line item here that said, hey, based on the review of your account, it's going to jump to $184. There is nothing about this lady's house that's changed. So what would $35 mean in 1 year? Well, for somebody on a fixed income, it means her BG&E bill is going to jump from $17.88 to $22.08 in 1 year. That's a 23% increase in 1 year. Her energy burden was 9%, and 6% is the agreed upon in our whole industry, really what's affordable for a homeowner. She does get energy assistance and it helps a bit. And in 1 year, her energy burden jumped by 2 points to 11%. It almost matches what the low income energy burden is. It's running about double in our state as of today. And just for some relativity, if you took that 2% increase, that energy burden, that percentage that you spend on your energy of your income, say for an $80,000 a year gross income, that would be $1,600 per year or $133 more a month. So you can kind of get an idea that it's a pretty big budget hit. So gas rates are expensive and people can't afford their gas. And it's just one more reason that electrification is pretty important.
Thank you, Laurel. I know for some folks have been in the weeds, so that was all, I'm sure, fascinating. I'm always fascinated to hear the numbers, especially of seeing the increase of turnoffs. I think for those who are less familiar with utility regulation generally, I'll give a Cliff Notes note, which is, it might seem complicated, but it's pretty simple. The more our utilities spend on infrastructure, their larger opportunity to profit. So that creates a powerful incentive for them to be wasteful with spending. And we rely on our utility regulators to keep a careful watch and rein in excessive spending. And one of the things we've been concerned about in the last decade is there hasn't been enough of a watch and a restraint on this spending, which is driving up our utility bills, and it's particularly around gas, which is sort of counter to our public health and climate goals. And so we really want to take a look at that. So we're really grateful that we have Delegate Embry on the call with us today, who was the sponsor last year of a bill, the Ratepayer Protection Act, to reform the STRIDE law that Laurel mentioned is one of the key points which we saw gas prices start to escalate from. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Delegate. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Emily and Laurel. I really enjoyed your presentation. I wish I'd heard the whole thing. So I know most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with STRIDE, especially since Laurel just talked about it. Ruth Ann, hello. So Emily came to me. This was a bill that was drafted by David Lapp with the Office of People's Counsel with input of Emily and many others, which is an attempt just to, there's a good argument just to repeal STRIDE altogether. This is, to me, this very moderate, careful attempt just to adjust STRIDE so that it's doing all the things that we've talked about. And it went nowhere last year. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm going to try again, and we're all going to try again. But what it does is requires the state and or the PSC in approving the STRIDE surcharge, the STRIDE, the infrastructure spending by the utilities, which again, I know Laurel talked about this, but STRIDE is very beneficial because you get the money right away. It's as Laurel explained, it's the capital payments that's the profit, but with STRIDE, you don't have to wait until you've spent the money. You can, as soon as PSC has approved the plan, the replacement of gas infrastructure, you can immediately start charging ratepayers the surcharge. So it's very beneficial. And the purpose of STRIDE in 2013 was, in part at least, I wasn't around, was to make the system safer. There was fear of leaks and explosions, and there's been that has been reviewed, and it has not in fact reduced the rate of leaks. So the purpose that STRIDE was introduced for is not in fact produce the goals, but it's been very profitable for the utilities. And so the bill says a few things. One is you have to actually do an analysis of whether replacement is a priority, whether this is a part of the gas infrastructure that is in fact in danger of leaking. Two, you have to analyze, is it cheaper and more cost effective to go in and just do repairs versus total replacement, which is extremely costly. And the technology has changed, so it is now possible to do spot repairs for actual leaks or likely leaks, and also to take into account the fact that we have committed to moving away from fossil fuels. So looking at alternatives and forcing not forcing, but legislating so that the PSA will consider that as part of their analysis. Another piece that's important is notice to consumers. 2 years is in the bill, but at least some notice so that consumers can say, I don't want to pay higher gas prices. I want to switch over to electric, which is, for me, I'm, as each gas appliance goes, I convert it to electric. And if I knew that my rates were going to go up, I'd do that a lot more expeditiously. So those are some of the elements. Again, very common sense. We had great support from every group that you could imagine, from Mary Perg, and also all the environmental groups, Consumer Protection, the Maryland Energy Administration, the Attorney General's Office, and others, making just a terrific case. And David Lapp, who's just about the most knowledgeable person on this, brought to bear terrific data and analysis. And he has even more this year, so I think we'll have an even stronger case to make. But it did not move in either the Senate or the House out of committee. It was a priority for the utilities for it not to move. And, there's a lot of energy-related legislation that was at play. And so I think hopefully this year this can make it into the priorities of leadership. I'm hopeful. But it's certainly, I'm very proud to be working about with everyone who's a partner, and especially Emily and David. And all the people who came down to testify, wrote letters. We had just a tremendous amount of support. But whenever you have, significant financial incentives, there's a lot of energy opposed to changing that. One of the arguments made was that it's not necessary because all these things are already considered. Well, if it's not necessary, what's the harm in passing it? So I think that's obviously untrue. I'm happy to answer questions. And anyone I am just looking at everybody on this call, and it's just a tremendous group of people. So many of you know more than I do about some of these utility issues, but happy to again answer anything or comment.
Well, Emily, Elizabeth, who I barely, right, I'm just teasing. Hey, Elizabeth, and thank you for that. So you said you might talk a little bit more about why you thought it failed, right? It's not needed because it's already there, but are there other things that you think we should focus on as we bring this back to try to get this passed that'll make a difference?
I mean, I think we have even more data and information. I think it just needs to be raised as a top priority instead of one of the priorities in this space. And Emily, please jump in. She's been doing this a lot longer than I have. So I think, just raising it up as the top priority for a number of groups, or one of the top priorities, is really important. I think we did make even though the bill didn't actually get voted on, I think we did make inroads in terms of making the arguments. One thing that frustrated me is, to me, this is not a partisan issue. This is about protecting ratepayers. It's a consumer protection issue. We did not successfully convince Republicans in the House or Senate of that. But I think that's an argument that we can make. And maybe that's just more one-on-one work. The utilities really did not, in my opinion, as a lawyer, I didn't think the utilities made a very strong case. Their arguments were flimsy. We had some delegates like Delegate Charkoudian who really, in the House side, just really eviscerated them. But so I'm hopeful, as I always am in Maryland, that, the good arguments will win. But Emily, why don't you?
Yeah, I think you got it right. I think we did win the argument, and I think there is strong support in the House. We have more work to do in the Senate. Not that there isn't. Just as you were saying, we didn't really bring our full power to bear. We decided to put the bill in because we knew it might be multi-year and it was going to take some deep education. We didn't want to wait any longer, but we didn't have a fall campaign. It was the Office of the People's Counsel was leading on, and I came in at the end to help, identify the right sponsors and get the bill in, but we didn't have a big coalition. We sort of heel strapped it in, but being part of this larger group, we think there's a lot more interest and more likelihood that groups prioritize it this year, and we have a head start. So I think we have a shot. And again, I do think one interesting thing about this is we should pass this law, but the utility regulators have a lot of control themselves. We want to win both at the PSC and in the legislature. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to make progress. It doesn't have to be everything, although it should be, if that makes sense.
Well, and just for full disclosure, since I called her the wrong name, I have known Elizabeth since she was in college.
Yes.
Which was only a couple of years ago. But Elizabeth, thank you for your leadership on this. It's so meaningful, and you are such a good lawyer. So making those lawyerly comments, I know we all appreciate your being willing to stand up. And, this does sound like one of those that just needed to get socialized. So good fact we've socialized it now, and now we need to get it through. So thanks, Elizabeth.
Oh, it's a
Echo,
pleasure. You working with, all you guys, it's just an honor. So
having a lawyer carry this bill is perfect. So I know you're out in the field. We appreciate taking your time. You're welcome to stick with us, but I know you have to go, and I'll be around later to answer additional questions on STRIDE. So thanks so much, Delegate. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Cybus next with the Office of the People's Counsel. If you aren't familiar with that office, they're an independent state agency whose entire job is to stand up for ratepayers. And I guess Mark can introduce himself as well. So we're really excited to have Mark here to talk about the future of gas docket.
Great. Thanks, Emily, and good evening to everybody. Again, I'm Mark Cybus from the Office of People's Counsel, standing in for David Lapp, People's Counsel, whom you've just heard about. I'm going to talk a little bit about this future of gas proceeding at the Public Service Commission. It's a proceeding that the commission opened in response to a petition from OPC. And depending on what the commission does with the case, it could have major implications in Maryland on how much the utilities are spending on gas infrastructure and recovering from customers, and how they operate their businesses more generally. But before I talk a little bit more about the case itself, I want to explain a little bit why OPC filed the petition that led to the proceeding. And it basically, it came out of 2 studies that we did in fall of 2022, both of which are available under the report section of our website. The first study looked at just how much money Maryland's gas utilities have in fact spent on gas infrastructure in recent years and projected how much they'll spend in the future based on their current plans. And the numbers were pretty eye-popping. The projection at the time was that between 2023 and 2045, the utilities would spend enough that it would cost Maryland's gas utility customers around $27 billion for that new infrastructure. Now, that's different from the total amount they spent, but again, they get back not just what they spent, but a profit on that amount as well. And that accounts for that high amount. Now, based on analysis we've done since the fall of 2022, it's clear that that amount is going to be significantly higher if the Commission and the General Assembly don't do something about it. Last fall, OPC released updated numbers, which upped that $27 billion figure to $41 billion. And we're in the process of updating the report again based on the newest information. I expect the number will be even higher. So it's a real problem. And that's sort of what, and well, the second study looked at what is likely to happen to rates in the future if nothing happens with the spending and if customers continue to electrify their homes, which again, they have an incentive to do because it's more economical and it makes more sense given Maryland's greenhouse gas reduction targets. And that study found that as customers increasingly electrify and leave the gas system, and there are fewer and fewer customers remaining on the gas system to pay the cost of it, the bills of those remaining customers will just skyrocket and become completely unaffordable. And that's especially a problem because those who remain on the system the last are likely to be those who can't afford to electrify. So those who can least afford to pay the high bills will end up with even higher bills. So it's these 2 studies and those findings that prompted OPC to file this petition with the Public Service Commission. And basically it asks the commission to take actions to address this problem and address this huge disconnect between Maryland's climate policy on one hand, which means that we have to reduce our use of gas, and this massive spending that the utilities are doing on gas infrastructure. We asked the commission to open a 2-track proceeding. On the 1 track, we want them to sort of take near-term actions that we view as relatively not controversial. Getting rid of the gas appliance incentives in Empower was one of those items. The commission, fortunately, is taking that up now in the Empower. Addressing deceptive gas company marketing was another thing, and we're hopeful that they'll take that up. Should not be controversial. Unfortunately, in some ways it is. The longer term track was sort of the longer term issues that the commission needs to address in terms of how utilities are building out their systems. And one major issue there is targeted electrification. How do we move from a system where a lot of people are on gas to sort of lopping off parts of the system strategically in ways that is most economical and beneficial to customers? So there are a host of complicated issues there that are going to take a longer time to address, and that's sort of this longer term track. Now, OPC filed its petition in February of 2023. In the fall of 2023, the commission took comments, and there were a large number of parties, including many on this call, that filed comments in support of the petition, asking the commission to take action. There was radio silence for a while from the commission, but this summer they held a legislative style hearing to hear more from the parties on the various comments that they filed. Again, at the hearing, there was mostly overwhelming support for the petition and for the commission taking this kind of action, but as one might expect, not a lot of support from the gas companies who are making a lot of money from this spending. So right now we're waiting for the commission to issue an order coming out of the proceeding on what next step it will take, and we're hopeful that will happen relatively soon. And as Emily was just describing, those next steps could include action on STRIDE. Yes, it would be great to have legislation that achieves what the STRIDE bill would achieve. But again, we think the commission can do a lot of that under the existing law. And the commission has sort of issued mixed signals about whether it thinks it can do those things or not. So we're hopeful that they'll open a proceeding to further examine that issue and resolve it in favor of doing more. One last thing I want to note that I think is important to this proceeding and that folks may or may not be aware of is, depending on who you talk to, some people see a difference between the future of gas in Maryland and the future of gas infrastructure. For OPC, for the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, for I think probably most, if not all, people on this call, there's not really a difference. We have to significantly reduce our use of gas to meet Maryland's climate objectives. And if we're to do that, the most cost-effective pathway to those emissions is to build and use less gas infrastructure. Seems pretty logical, right? The gas utilities have a different story. They say that, well, yeah, we need to reduce our use of gas, but we can do that most cost effectively by actually keeping all the gas infrastructure and continuing to build our systems. It sounds absurd, and frankly, it is. They have concocted an explanation for that that involves electrification just having astronomically high costs, which it doesn't need to have if we're using energy efficiently through Empower and taking other measures. And their numbers are just ridiculously inflated, which, happy to talk more about that in any questions. But basically, the future of gas means to meet the climate objectives, we have to use much less of it. And the most cost-effective way to do that is to significantly reduce our use of gas infrastructure. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. If you can stick around, we're gonna come back to questions after our final presentation. We have a link there in the chat as well. We are collecting petitions to the PSC around the future of gas proceeding. That body certainly moves slow, but we know the more we can be out in the public or directly sending them messages is really important. They hear from the utilities day in and day out. And while they're not elected officials, they are still interested in public opinion and want public comment. I'm going to turn it over to our final presenter, which is Josh Tolkien from the Sierra Club, to talk about various incentives to help people electrify through state and federal government. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks a lot. Good evening, everybody. I'm Josh Tolkien from the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club has been working with many of the organizations on this call and many of you to enact critical reforms to properly incentivize the behavior, the transition to clean renewable energy, and the transition to electrify our homes. The Empower Maryland program is one of the most successful energy efficiency programs in the country. And has helped save Marylanders billions of dollars. But it became clear in the last several years that the program was in need of an upgrade. As noted earlier, there were incentives for gas furnaces. There are reports, thanks to Mary Perg and others, that the utilities were receiving way above average rates of return on some of the investments on energy efficiency. In other words, they were making a lot of money off of the ratepayers. We could do better. So clearly, since it was clear that it needed to be updated, that just meant that it was simply going to happen, right? Not that way. It took a huge amount of work at the Public Service Commission and the General Assembly to push for this Empower reform. It's especially hard when we're dealing with complicated material like this, where we, the advocates, need to make sure we know everything, and then we're actually spending a lot of time educating legislators. But here is the good news. After several years of advocacy, Empower reform passed last year. There are now cost containment mechanisms in there to protect consumers. The program is now tied broadly to Maryland's greenhouse gas goal. There are directives to create incentives for electrification and fuel switching so that will actually help people electrify their homes. But our job isn't done yet. There are ongoing proceedings that are happening this week where we will be working with the Public Service Commission to help shape what the Empower program looks like. The utilities create these 3-year proposals. They'll be revising the 2024 to 2026 proposal. So the hearings will take place October 22nd to 24th, and this will be the first of several times to be weighing in. Starting next year or the year after, the same way that you were able to get a rebate to change your light bulb, or sometimes free light bulbs or a free energy audit, we will start to see the integration of electrification, which is huge and the product of advocacy. Another exciting opportunity is that Maryland is slated to receive around $150 million from something called the IRA Home Retrofit Program. This was a special incentive created in the Inflation Reduction Act to encourage additional energy efficiency and electrification. Right now, the Maryland Energy Administration is helping to design the program. They have the very broad ideas of how they want to allocate the funding, but there will be several important public input processes in the next several months where they will be looking for community organizations and advocates to weigh in to help shape these programs. This is not just about arguing over how much money they should be putting aside. This is also about helping to shape these programs so that they are reaching the people that need them, so that they are being advertised in culturally competent ways, using language that's accessible, and about making it simpler for consumers. We just had a great meeting with the Department of Housing and Community Development today to learn that they are continuing to streamline their application process for low-income Marylanders, who will, I think within a month or so, have a special section on the website for a simple application, and then another 2 months we'll have a completely streamlined online application process, one application for every possible benefit you can receive, including federal benefits and ideally the Empower benefits. The point here is that it takes constant vigilance to make sure that these programs are working for all Marylanders and are moving us in the direction that we need to move around electrification, reducing energy usage, and having honest conversations with the public about the costs that are looming just around the corner or now when it comes to gas prices, as Laurel and Mark were talking about. So it's more important than ever that we're pushing for more programs to help Marylanders save energy, because the cheapest reduction in pollution we can make is the energy that we never use in the first place. So we're excited to work with all of you on the Upgrade Maryland campaign to understand these complicated regulatory spaces and push really hard for the advances of the Public Service Commission that we know that we need to help put dollars back in Marylanders' hands and make the changes we need to our grid and to our homes. Emily, thanks a lot. Back to you.
Thank you, Josh. And I think what you were touching on at the end is similar to some of the conversations that's gone on in the chat of like, there is a normal and natural reaction to, oh, isn't this means there's going to be more demand on our grid? Can we handle it? And I wanted to make 2 points on that. One, research that has been done says, yes, at least in the near term, our grid can handle this through at least 2030s. And obviously, yeah, as I know people will chime out, there is risk of that being diverted by the growth of data centers, for example, or other big energy users. And it's one key reason is when we talk about efficiency, when we talk about making our homes have clean, efficient electricity, we're not just talking about switching people from gas to electric. We're also talking about moving people who are on inefficient gas resistance heat to efficient heat pumps, which are going to reduce our energy use. So there is a scenario if we're actually doing energy efficiency measures from upgrading our appliances, additional weatherization, we can be bringing energy use down. I don't want to be too Pollyannish. None of this is going to be easy. We do need to produce more clean energy in the state. There are a lot of issues with our regional grid. I know there's a lot of problems out there, but I'm optimistic we can do it, and we certainly need to be making steps in that direction. The other point I meant to make after Mark, before we turn it over to questions, is just those sheer numbers. Whenever I hear them, I'm flabbergasted. 27 billion, 41 billion that we're spending on maintaining and expanding our gas infrastructure. I in no way think that's going to go to zero tomorrow or even in 5 or 10 years. But for those of us who have been working on climate change, on consumer protection, we know the price tag around our clean energy goals, 12 billion, right, to institute the state's climate plan. When we are wasting money on gas infrastructure we don't need, or expanding gas infrastructure, or replacing instead of repairing our gas infrastructure, we're losing out on literally billions of dollars we could be using for this clean energy transition. So we shouldn't overlook that. It's not, too often we hear, we can't afford this, we can't afford this. Well, we can't afford to continue to be throwing money into this aging infrastructure. It served us well over the last 100 years. I'm glad we don't have coal in our homes anymore, but it's time to make another transition. So, Leslie, I don't know if you've been collecting comments or if folks want to raise their hand, how you want to handle this. I know our speakers are happy to answer questions. So if you have one, feel free to put in the chat or raise your hand, direct it at someone perhaps, or I can field and say who it should go to.
Hi, Emily. Yeah, I've been collecting comments from folks. And again, thank you to all our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by reading some of the questions. Some of them have been answered in the chat, but I think it would still be nice for folks to know this information if they haven't been paying attention to the chat, and be able to, maybe they have some of the similar answers. So I'll start off with the first question, and this is some of the folks that a lot of folks had in this one. I can answer. Will the slides or presentations be available after this? Yes, we'll be sharing all the information you viewed here in a follow-up email, as well as the recording. So you will have the QR codes and links. The next question is, do the House and Senate Energy Committee chairs support your bill? And Emily, I think you may have answered that in the chat, but if you could share again.
Yeah, I'd say neither have really gone on record either way. Not that they usually do if they can avoid it, but that's something we'll be working on this fall. I'd say generally we feel we have a strong shot in the House, but that's not to say there's can't be or isn't support in the Senate. They just haven't come out publicly on the bill.
Thank you, Emily. The next question is for Mark with OPC. Has OPC looked into the legal arguments as to who pays for the stranded assets? Ratepayers or stockholders, particularly even if everyone gets off gas, but the costs and profits on these capital investments have not been fully recovered? Example, they are stranded assets.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's certainly part of what we see is happening in this longer term part of the future of gas proceeding. We certainly have started thinking about it, but I don't know that we have a clear answer to that. I think there's a lot more analysis to be done. Our priority right now is just to sort of stop the additional spending. Before you figure out what happens with everything that has been built but shouldn't have been built, you should just stop like new stuff from being built. So that's sort of what we're focused on in the short term. That bigger issue of like, well, as we electrify, what happens to the stuff we're no longer using, that we're retiring before the end of its useful life? That's going to be I think a very difficult debate. I don't know that the existing law is entirely clear about that. I think we can fully expect the gas companies to say that if the state takes action that results in their infrastructure going away sooner than they have planned it to go away, that the cost should fall on ratepayers. We will certainly argue to the contrary. One other thing just to point out is that if utilities were competitive businesses, if they didn't have monopolies in the way they have, they would never be making these investments, because the risk is would be so great if they weren't operating in a monopoly environment. So yeah, it's a really good question. Don't have a great answer to it, but I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Moving on to the next question. Has anyone done an analysis of converting HVAC to heat pump, thus using more electricity? In that scenario, would the electricity bill still be lower given anticipated rate increases as the base scenario of a mix of gas and electricity bills that both increase?
Let's turn that one to Laurel. I think you answered that in the chat, right? You want to try give it a shot?
I mean, I know they're out there, and I don't have the exact answer, but I do know that a cold climate heat pump is 3 times more efficient than a gas furnace. So both I think gas rates are definitely raising faster, and they're just going like this. So if you switch, like I know we have, to heat pumps, you definitely see a bump up in electricity, but it's lower than the gas. But I think there's Rewiring America has some good stuff on that. That would be interesting. I'll find some links and share them.
I can also weigh in there if it would be helpful. There
Great.
are there are a couple good studies out there. First, I think Emily alluded to this earlier, but in terms of like the near-term costs of electrification and the ability of the grid to handle it, the Public Service Commission did a study that looked at that issue through 2030 and basically determined we have plenty of headroom to sort of electrify in that time frame. There's a big study that the Maryland Commission on Climate Change did a few years ago that basically looked at what is the most cost-effective pathway for Maryland to achieve its greenhouse reduction goals. And the conclusion was it's a pathway that focuses on a high electrification scenario where we are not using gas as backup heat. The utilities, BGE has produced a study that says, oh, it's cheaper to use gas as backup. But we've identified many major flaws in that study and think it's just not accurate at all. The third study, and this sort of brings in the Rewiring America analysis, is the State Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force, which sort of convened last year, I think pursuant to the Climate Solutions Now Act, and looked closely at some of these issues. And basically, this, found the same thing. The cheapest new construction is all electric, and it continues to be cheaper to convert existing building stock that has gas and electric to all electric. So that study is on their website as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Since we do have to wrap our portion of the Q&A section first, I want to give a moment to the folks who have their hand raised. I will pass it to Lynn Parsons to ask your question.
I have so many questions. I came here without the homework done. So I think my most burning question, I live in a community, or I used to live in a community, but I still am on a committee looking at trying to reduce our fossil fuel use. And it's all gas and oil fueled boilers and chillers. And we've been told it's just completely impractical to replace all that with heat pumps. There are garden style units, and the idea of digging up the ground, and there's no way. So do I understand what you're suggesting here, that as the rest of the population drops using fossil fuels, that our costs will skyrocket because it will cost more for the utility to support our needs? Is that what I'm understanding from this?
The particular concern is around gas specifically, because gas delivery charges will be shared amongst fewer and fewer groups of people. For oil, that's not necessarily the case, because oil is paid by the individual to have it delivered to their home. There's no pipeline. I don't know as much about oil commodity prices. They probably have gone up as well too.
And we're trying to get rid of those oil tanks.
Right,
we don't want them anymore.
Right. I think I might still have one buried in my home. I'm not sure. I'm surprised to hear that. I mean, there's an upfront expense. And I know this is one of the areas that the new state grants are looking at, is helping people who have oil heat specifically access incentives for heat pumps, because they don't currently qualify for Empower. If you have folks on gas, I'm surprised to hear they say it's not worth it, because I would think it obviously is. I don't know if Mark or Laurel has more to say, other than one of the times to do it is when you're replacing your AC. That's, the heat pump works as both the AC and home heating. But Laurel or Mark, who knows more about the technical aspects, what would you say? Anything?
Yeah, again, what kind of structure are we talking about here?
So we do have heat pumps in some of the much older garden style buildings, but they have far fewer units. We have some units with like eight apartments that, 2 or 3 bedrooms. And those, they feel like, I guess we would have to have so many heat pumps stacked up, or whatever they are, stacked up outside. It would just be totally impractical.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the Maryland Commission on Climate Change study from a few years ago found that there are a small number of commercial and industrial facilities for which it may be cheaper to continue with gas than to electrify, but it's a pretty small subset. And I think for most multifamily buildings, it continues to be cheaper to electrify. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't significant upfront costs. And part of the deterrent could be, well, how do we front these upfront costs, even if we're going to realize the savings? Or there may be a concern that the savings won't be realized fast enough to satisfy expectations. It's a case-by-case analysis, but the one other thing I'd say is that we have a contractor community that may not always be as well educated on the capacity of heat pumps, their capabilities, and the cost of installing them as they should be. There's actually been some discussion about how do we improve contractor performance in that regard. So, I think as we get a better trained HVAC industry, we will probably see costs go down even more. And yeah, so it's a case-by-case basis, but I think if you get a quote from a contractor that really understands heat pumps, you're likely to find that it's going to be cheaper in the long run to electrify.
So this was a contractor who did a level 1 audit through the Green Bank and came back with this suggestion that we really needed to just go with monitoring-based commissioning and try to, make our existing style of heating and cooling as efficient as possible. But anyway, I don't want to.
No, I appreciate that, Lynn, and I'm happy to put my contact in the chat. I'm sure Mark is too, because there certainly are places where it's more complicated. The technology is not there yet. The upfront costs are going to be could be really high. If like the ultimate solution would be network geothermal, but that's going to be really expensive and too much that the individual homeowners could bear. So I don't think we're going to solve it on the phone today, but I'm sure our experts would be happy to follow up with you. Laurel, we're at time. So do you have something really quick so I can kick it over to
30 seconds. I think Leslie's frustration in this transition is so real because you go out in the real world and you call a contractor, and sometimes, like I always tell people, if you talk to an old timer, but there's some really cool research, just put a pin in this, that New York State did for just what you're talking about, Leslie. Think about all of the high-rise, low-income housing units the state of New York offers. And they did a massive energy challenge to the heating HVAC world and said, help us fix this. And there's some really cool technology. There's a window heat pump unit that won. And I'm going to send you a little brief on it just to kind of give you some inspiration that there is probably going to be other solutions. So sometimes you just have to wait for things, but it's, I think I've heard that too, like, oh, we can't do this. And then I called somebody else and I was like, that's interesting. There's 6 ways to get to the courthouse. So change is hard. I'll get your email.
Yes, thank you all. Sorry that we can't stick around too much of kids to put to sleep, but I'll put my contact in the chat, and I'm going to kick it over to Zoe with the Sierra Club to talk about follow-up and action items.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I'm the field organizer for the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. So I want to thank everyone for sticking with us on the call. I know you're at 7:01, so I will just take a minute of your time to wrap us up and go over some of the next steps and action items that we have, because like everyone on this call has talked about across all of the issues, at the core of it is that we need to align our policies across all of these things with our values to keep Maryland homes healthy and safe for the people who live in them, to protect ratepayers, and also to meet the essential climate goals that we have set. So some of the things that have been mentioned on this call, I would urge you to go to the Future of Gas petition that was mentioned to tell utility regulators that we need to plan for the future, that we need to use the regulations in our power to make a plan that's sustainable and safe and healthy for all of us. So go to the upgrademaryland.org website / take action. That was dropped in the chat earlier as well. And you can use that website too to see updates on the campaign as we're going forward. And then the other thing that's coming up that was mentioned, that's happening this week, starting tomorrow. So this week, there are going to be Empower hearings. So starting tomorrow at 10 a.m., you can tune in with this YouTube link that we have, or attend in person at the Maryland Public Service Commission building in Baltimore. And let us know. Multiple emails, I believe, have been dropped in the chat, but let us know if you're planning to attend. And we would love to connect. And you will be receiving a follow-up email with all of this information and more ways to stay involved and get involved. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah. If you were unable to get to your question, stay tuned for the follow-up. So we will be sending out a survey and an email with lots of information and ways to plug in with us.
Thank you. There was a question if someone could post the PSC YouTube link in the chat. So, I actually have it up still from earlier. I will do that. Thank you all for joining. You can check out the Upgrade Maryland website, upgrademaryland.org, for additional updates. Look out for email. The Maryland Sierra Club Facebook page had this streamed live if you want to go back and see anything you missed. But we really appreciate you taking the time. I know we couldn't get through everything, but a good start to the conversation. Have a good night.